Hi there. I'm so happy you're here. Here's what you'll gain by listening to the very last second of this conversation with Dr. Dan Worry. Dan argues that America's early childhood system needs fundamental reform, as we're currently paying for ineffective approaches rather than investing in evidence based solutions that would better serve children, families, and society at large. You'll learn three simple truths about early development, why terms like daycare and childcare should be abandoned, and how several states are leading the way in early childhood reform. Stay with us. I am so happy to have you join our conversation. This is Solutions Coaching and Teaching Strategies, the podcast that extends education beyond the classroom. A show that offers educators and caregivers strategies to try right away and ensure every student receives the inspiration and support they need to thrive. I am Olivia Wall, and I am so happy to welcome my guest today, Dr. Dan Worry. I'll tell you a little bit about Dan if you haven't already gotten to know him. Dan is the founder and president of Early Childhood Policy Solutions, LLC. He is a strategic advisor on early childhood at the Saul Zaentz Charitable Foundation. Dan is also the founding director of early learning at the Hunt Institute in Cary, North Carolina. And Dan, you have so much credit in this game because you were a kindergarten teacher.
I was.
You were a school district administrator and a state agency administrator. I am so honored to hold space for this conversation. I've been carrying your book around. It's a perfect size of 100 pages of goodness. I have the book right here. The book's called The Daycare Myth: What We Get Wrong About Early Care and Education and What We Should Do About It. You offer a myriad of strategies so we can all hit the ground running. And Dan, I just need to let you know before we jump into conversation that the week of the election happened, and my husband and I were out to dinner with another couple, and we were talking about how we're all going to move forward, regardless of how everyone voted. And I was talking about the hope you give me with your social posts, but the book. And I truly believe that this is the way our world needs to move forward to make humanity what it could be. And I don't say that lightly. And so if you as a listener have not picked up Dan's book yet, that's a must. And then listen to this conversation because I think it will give you the same hope that I hold. But Dan, I can't thank you enough for this. So I'm excited.
Olivia, that's what a kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
Me too. So I asked you ahead of time. I like to offer guests a piece of research or a researcher that you lean on often that ties to this work. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. That's a hard. I see all of your books behind you. Like as a former kindergarten teacher, like people ask, like, what's your favorite children's book? And I always say, like, oh, that's like picking a favorite child, right?
Yeah.
And I think of research very much the same way. There's so much that has influenced me. But as you know from looking at the book, I have spent a lot of time immersed in the work of James Heckman, preparing for that book. For listeners who may not be familiar, Dr. Heckman is a Nobel Prize winning economist, formerly of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank, currently a professor of economics at the University of Chicago. But what Dr. Heckman has done that I think is so revolutionary for the early childhood field is that he has spent decades looking at the return on investment from public investments in high quality programs for young children, and so has been able to take some of the foundational studies in the field, our best known longitudinal studies that are now going on 50 and 60 years worth of tracking participants, and has really been able to translate that to to the long-term return to taxpayers. I'm frequently asked on social media, for example. Like, why should I pay for somebody else's child to, have
Yes.
childcare or XYZ? And, I think what Dr. Hetman helps us to understand, in terms of those long-term benefits, is that we're already paying, right? We're
Yeah.
paying. We're just, the book very much makes the case that we are paying for the system we need. We're just doing it in all the dumbest ways,
Backwards.
frankly, right? That
Yes.
we seem content to pay endlessly and to saddle taxpayers with the cost of greater dependence on social services in adulthood, or poor health outcomes, or more interactions with the criminal justice system than would otherwise be the case. We know that high quality investments in young children help to mitigate against all of these terrifically costly negative outcomes later in life. And so I think boy, Dr. Hetman's work, which shows ultimately a 13.1% annual
It's
return on
crazy.
investment, which is roughly double what the Standard and Poor's 500
Yes.
returns in the stock market. So boy, his work has been very influential in helping to shape the message of this book.
I would say too, it for folks that read the book or continue to read the book over and over, like me, I have highlighted pages, annotated pages, posted it. It's helping me get smarter about the conversations I need to be having as well. And one of right out of the gate, when I got to the three simple truths, that hit me hard. So I'd love for you to illuminate that for listeners. What
Yeah.
are the three simple truths to early development?
Yeah, well, so the book itself sort of unpacks what I describe as the disconnect between what we know from the science of early development and how that is translated, or frankly, in most cases, not well translated
Right.
in our public policy. And so, in the first chapter, I spend some time basically reviewing and introducing readers to sort of a synopsis. In all fairness, the three simple truths that name is something I kind of coined for the book, but the content is certainly not original research on my part. It's my effort to provide a pithy synopsis of what do we know from decades of research on young children, and it comes down right now to these three things. Right, that first, that despite the fact that we frequently hear policymakers talk about wanting young children to come to kindergarten ready to
Yeah.
learn, right, as if that's where learning begins. What we know, the first of those truths is that learning actually begins in utero and never stops. Right,
Yes.
and that's a really exciting. I want to unpack the other truths, but that is a really exciting and important line of research right now that I think is really cutting edge in the
I do
in
too.
the field, right? That even to say that children are learning from day one is a little bit underselling the case, right?
I
That we
agree.
know that for example, that children's brains are beginning to wire themselves around if not the vocabulary at that point, certainly the rhythms and the patterns of their mother's native language, and that young children's brains sort of light up in the hours after birth in response to their mother's native language in a way that they don't to foreign languages. So that learning begins in utero and never stops is the first of those. The second is that this period from prenatal to three is a uniquely consequential window in all of human development. It is the time during which the fundamental architecture of the brain is wired, ideally, in ways that will help to undergird our long-term success, not only in school but in life. And so those early years take on a terrific importance. And then the third of those relates to how do we optimize those connections? And the answer is that this brain development is optimized through stable, nurturing, one-on-one interactions between infants and highly engaged adults. right?
Yes.
And so, the combination of those three things is, in my estimation, sadly, very much at odds with the way we think about young children and the way that we have structured our systems for young children in this country. The title, The Daycare Myth, refers to this idea that, we have sort of conceptualized for the better part of 100 years now, um, childcare or daycare
Yes.
as this separate, this special thing that is separate and distinct from education, right? That young children need care, and by care in this case, I'm not necessarily talking about nurture, right? Because we,
Right.
in the context of those three simple truths, obviously, those stable, loving, nurturing interactions are absolutely key. What I'm talking about is really care more at the policy level, sort of the idea that, what babies need primarily is someone to watch over and make sure they'll be safe for 8 hours
Right.
while their parents are at work. That there is this thing called daycare, that that it is a safe, warm place where reasonably your child will be fed and have their diaper changed and will still be intact when you get back at the end of the day.
Right.
That's what young children need, but that it is when they get slightly older that they get involved in rich forms of learning and education, and we just know that that's not the case, right?
No, it's not. It's not. But I also I'm flooded with thinking back of being pregnant with both of my boys and the experiences. And I think sometimes caregivers don't know how important those moments are of even playing music for children in utero. And I remember we would play the Beatles and then shift to classical, and we would actually watch the way the boys moved inside, just in reaction and response. And then we would watch during tummy time after they were first born, of how when we played that music, the same music that was played
Yeah.
in utero, they would respond and
Yeah.
react. So I think like these moments of gold, that they cannot be underestimated. And before we go into why we have to banish some of the terms that you just spoke to, I also want to just highlight every morning when I wake up very early, the world is a quiet place when I get up, and I love it that way. I find you on social because you are a bright light, and the videos you capture and you post are such great examples of what you just spoke to,
Yeah.
those nurturing, engaging interactions that go unnoticed sometimes in households. And my favorite thing about what you're doing, I've heard, you're the most positive person on social. I think it's so much richer than that, what you're doing. It's really showing other grown-ups with babies what the possibilities are. These are moments that really matter. So I wanted to just ask you, I've been dying to ask you this.
Yeah.
How do you acquire these magical videos that you post on social? Do caregivers just send them to you? Like, how do you get them?
Increasingly, the answer is yes. That
Okay.
as that project has sort of taken wing, I have families from all over the world that are sending me videos, that they have taken of their own kids. But a lot of them, in fairness, are sourced right to social media, right? That these are videos that are floating out there on TikTok and Instagram, and what I have done here in recent years is looked for those video examples that, Olivia, and you may have had the same experience. When I was a pre-service teacher learning about child development for the first time, everything I learned I had to learn in a book.
Yes.
Or maybe if you were very lucky, you had an opportunity to go and there was a lab preschool with a two-way mirror that you could look through for a
Right.
little while. And but I think it has sort of dawned on me that not only as teachers, but as parents, we very much have to learn these things on the job.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
social media has been now such a treasure trove of practical examples. And so, where this started, I wish I could tell you at the beginning it was a very strategic thing. What actually happened, and I wish I could even remember what the exact, kind of first video
Right.
was. I was posting a lot about my work in the policy world, um, and ran across a viral video of a baby that was incredibly adorable. And I don't remember the specific content, but the gist of sort of all of my social media posts is, yes, absolutely, this is adorable, but it's so much more, right? That
Yes.
there's look at all of the development that is on display here. Look at the language learning that is happening, and the motor skills that are developing, and the wonderful interactions between parents and children. And so, a lot of that is sourced and cited, back to the original posters. And my contribution to that is sort of curating those videos, maybe
Yes.
being a watchful eye for them, but then adding in the commentary around. Let's unpack a little bit about what we're actually seeing
It's brilliant.
here. And I think of it now, though I sort of half jokingly say there wasn't kind of a master strategy to this to begin with. There very much is, at this point. I think of it as a kind of a public education campaign, a steady
Yes.
drumbeat around actually those three simple truths, right? To help people to understand, that this is not just I think a lot of people think of babies as being, um, not quite ready for prime time, I guess, in a way, right? That we,
They're so ready.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like even the idea that we need to be reading and talking, is understandably, frankly, a kind of a foreign idea for some parents. Like,
Right.
why would you talk to someone who can't speak back to you?
Right.
But what we know is that they are watching and they are learning, and that the models that you're providing are so powerful. And so, I'm trying to lift that up each day to help parents
You
really to
do.
understand, really that second of the truths, that period from prenatal to 3 is the most consequential window in all of human development. And then the book, is, in my mind, sort of the flip side to that coin, which is to say, if we know these things to be true, then what do we need to do about it? Or in this case, what do we need to do differently,
Yes.
um, in our public policy?
Yes, and I just wanna highlight again that idea of parallel practice, because that is my favorite thing about the videos. You are labeling and naming the magic that is happening behind the video, and I love that they're curated with that thought process, because then they're replicable. Other grown-ups watching can name what their children are doing in those moments that are just filled with joy, and they're really magical. So I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah.
And we do need to banish some terms. We need to get rid of terms from our collective vocabulary if we're going to move forward. And so you just said we need to think of the second simple truth, but we need to do that by banishing the term daycare and the term childcare. Can you speak more to why? You've already scratched
Yeah.
the surface, but let's go a little bit deeper with it.
Well, I think, to me, the primary message, and you'll know, and but maybe I should explain for readers. The book, despite its compact, concise length, is really targeting three different audiences concurrently, right? That it is for parents, it is for policymakers, and it is for early childhood professionals, which covers a pretty wide swath of all of us at this point in adulthood. But I think the most important message, if I could, in one sentence, say to parents, what's the most important thing that you need to know from this book? It is that as you are selecting, um, you know, what's going to happen for your baby, right? Whether you're going to stay home with your infant, whether you're going to choose an out of home program. The decisions that you make for your baby are hugely consequential, and what you're selecting in this case is not, and let me underline,
Yes.
not a babysitter, right? You're not picking a babysitter. You are literally selecting the adults who will co-construct your child's brain.
No
And
pressure. No
right,
pressure.
and that's, I mean, right, no pressure, but pressure, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
All
something,
pressure.
it's something that you need to be mindful of,
Right.
and you need to make that choice incredibly carefully and incredibly thoughtfully. And so, I am on a bit of a crusade. It's funny, in the field, you may know that even the term daycare has fallen very much out of favor,
Yes.
um, but in favor of childcare, which is, probably an incremental step forward. In the book, though, I make the case that we probably need to be moving away from both of those labels, right? That the people who work with young children during this formative stage of development are not babysitters, they're not daycare workers, they're not childcare providers, they're teachers,
They are.
right?
Yes.
And that all environments for young children are learning environments. There's no such thing as a strictly care environment, despite our best efforts to sort of create this false dichotomy that, the young children are learning in every environment, that that whether you want to call them, early childhood education, early care and education, or just call them school. Um, these are learning environments second only to the home in terms of their importance. And so, part of the message, I talk to parents about, the importance of selecting those settings. One of the primary messages to the early childhood field in this book is that we have to do a better job of claiming our titles, right? And that, you can't expect to be seen necessarily, or respected necessarily, or compensated uh,
Yes.
as the professionals that you are, um, until you yourself, claim that mantle and claim those titles. And so I think, we could go a very long way toward helping policymakers and the public to reconceptualize what these places really are,
Yes.
by making some adjustments in our terminology and abandoning terms like daycare.
I also keep thinking of the choices that you were just speaking to, because I know so many other caregivers that are at that precipice of really loving their careers and really wanting to stay home with
Yeah,
their babies. And I do not feel like the states have set caregivers up for success when it comes to that, at
absolutely not.
all,
Yeah.
at all. And so, can you speak then to, how could we provide more meaningful choice, that would support caregivers both that want to stay at home and in the workforce?
Yep. Well, so, one of the more shocking statistics that I ran across in researching this book that is included is that 1 in 4 American mothers has to return to the workforce full time within 2 weeks
It's
of
crazy.
giving birth. Isn't that amazing? Two
It's
weeks. And
awful. Yeah.
so, and in fairness, that's not the case for most mothers. Most have a slightly better situation. Certainly, mothers working in professional fields, and that there are employers who provide, in many cases, very or at least comparatively robust kind of paid family leave policies. But let me assure you, if you're working at a fast food restaurant as a cashier, chances are good that you're not going to get 4 months of paid leave, or 6 months of paid leave when you have a new baby arrive in your home. And so, that is, uh, if I have a regret about the book, is I feel like I could have done an entire chapter just on this, maybe, and added it in, because what we know is that the earliest weeks and months of life are an absolutely critical time in the formation of attachment, right? That secure attachment between infants and their caregivers is the foundation of their long-term mental health. Um, and what we have currently is a system that interrupts that process for all too many kids, right? Whether it is that mom has to return to work full time within 2 weeks, or frankly, we are facing such a crisis in the early childhood field. We know that in these early care and education settings, and in what we call child care settings in particular, that that upward of 40% of teachers revolve out of that field, leave the classroom every year.
Yeah.
There's this 40% attrition rate, and so at precisely the time, that young children need that third of the simple truths, right? The secure, nurturing, face-to-face interactions with highly engaged adults. We are instead providing them sort of a revolving door
Yeah.
of
Transient.
adults who
Yeah.
are in many cases, ill prepared for the work. They haven't been in the field long enough to, develop the kind of knowledge and expertise that we would hope for them to. Um, they aren't compensated sufficiently to really realistically ask that they further their education any more than they already have. In many cases, states are looking for individuals who are 18 years old, hopefully. Frankly, and even that is starting to erode. But
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, 18 years old and with a clean criminal background check, and that's sort of the bar for employment in all too many of these settings. The reason for that, in part, is again going back to this daycare myth idea. When we don't conceptualize of these places as educational, when we don't conceptualize of what happens for children
Yeah.
as deep forms of learning and optimizing their early development, and instead think of this as almost like a holding pen for children,
Right.
um, that has a very big impact on the respect of those teachers and their compensation. And what we know right now is that the people who work in these classrooms, by and large, make not only less but dollars an hour less in many cases than people we employ to hand French fries through a window.
Yeah.
Or the most recent data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, suggests that childcare teachers are making 59 cents an hour less than dog walkers in this country.
That I mean, it's shameful. And I there was a line in the book that I highlighted and I read it over and over because I know the implications. You've done such a beautiful job of speaking to each of the audiences that you mentioned earlier of this is what you need to do to move forward in the process. And the line that I go back to is a lot of this reform does sit on the shoulders of Congress. So what could we do? What do we need to do? Or what do we need to ask Congress to do to shift some of these patterns that are not okay right now?
Well, a couple of things. I think, first is that I wrote this book in hopes that it would be an opportunity for us to just pause and reflect,
Yeah.
right, on the sort of the error of our ways. I think, the book makes the case that, we're not that I think this is, by the way, a diabolical plot, but I do think that if we went through the thought exercise of saying, all right, I'm going to challenge you to create the worst possible system. Like if you went through this exercise and thought, what would be the worst system, a system that would really poorly reflect what we know about the needs of young children, frankly, you'd be hard pressed to come up with a better example of that than what families are forced to navigate in this country each and every day. And so, my hope is that this is an opportunity um, to just think differently, to
Yes.
stop and say, wait a minute, is this, are we doing the right things here? And we're not. And so, job number one is that I am hopeful that policymakers will use this book to do just that, to sort of reflect on, wait a minute, um, what are the implications of this system that we have in terms of not only the individual development of children, which may be of the greatest interest, obviously, to the children themselves and their families, but what are the implications for taxpayers and for state
Yes.
economy and then for employers and all of these other systems. So I think just even the messaging is important, but I do think, to your point, that Congress plays an important role. One of the exciting things that has come out of my work at the Hunt Institute and now in my private consulting practice is that I see huge bipartisan support for investments in children, but primarily at the state level right now.
Okay.
It may not surprise any of your listeners to know that uh, Congress in particular is kind of a uniquely divisive place
Yes.
in recent years, especially, and maybe even to say in recent years is to underestimate how divisive and partisan a place it has been. But I think the end result, the danger of leaving too much to the whims of the individual states, though there are states that are absolutely leading in this space, is that we create a really inequitable system across the country,
Yeah.
right? Where a child who happens to be born in this state may have access to really robust kinds of supports, whereas children born across the state line, even next door, may well not have anywhere near the same opportunity. So I do think that it is incumbent on Congress to make sure that we've got the resources in place to really make a transformative change. The book calls for both a transformative investment in children and families, um, but also recognizing that transformative, transformative changes rarely happen in one big
Yeah.
fell swoop.
It's a long game.
Also provides, a list of opportunities, some low hanging fruit for things that we're doing wrong that we, with all the best intentions, um, probably need to fix, and then also highlights some really promising practices in the states as well. So
Dan, but
yeah.
would you mind highlighting too for us which states are leading the way? And could you name a couple without revealing too much of those
No, no, I'm happy
low-hanging
to.
fruits? Yeah, I think it'd
Happy
be
to.
helpful.
So, in terms of states that are leading the way, I think there are a couple that a couple of places that spring to mind. Obviously, New Mexico has received a lot of attention. Yeah. Here in recent years. About 2 years ago now, they had a constitutional amendment on the ballot that would enshrine in the state constitution a right to early childhood funding, a greater funding for early childhood programs. And with that, they have managed to very dramatically increase their program offerings, dramatically increase the number of families in the states that qualify for childcare subsidies, for example. I mean, families at a much higher level of income than maybe in other states. Vermont has done something similar recently. They passed a small kind of fractional payroll tax to help to support their early childhood system, which on a per capita basis, there are actually many fewer children in Vermont than there are in New Mexico, and so on a per capita basis, arguably Vermont has gone even a little further than New Mexico has. I think Washington D.C. is leading in a special way. they have enacted something called the Pay Equity Fund, but it is it's a marginal tax increase on the highest income earners in the district. They are using this, this small new tax to help to close the compensation gap in early childhood. And so with funds from that Pay Equity Fund, they are able to provide teachers in childcare settings currently a $14,000 increase annually
Wow.
on their salaries. But I think it's important to say too that that this is happening in red states, in blue states,
Yes.
everywhere in between. I did some work I'm very proud of here recently, with Governor Burgum and his administration in North Dakota, where they made a really historic new investment in um, you know, uh, uh, in the working families of the state to expand child care access. My home state of South Carolina is highlighted in the book as a real leader in their mixed delivery pre-K system, and so it's happening in pockets all across the country.
It is, and I so appreciate you offering those examples because I think I learn through models just as a teacher myself, and as a mom, and I think it's critical that if we're asking Congress to make these major shifts, they need to understand there are many places, individual states that are doing this work that we can use as examples and create this gorgeous model that borrows the goodness from all, is potential. I think if we start leaning on those strengths, and what better way could we start to unite and come together around our differences than around children, than around babies, hope for the future? I can't imagine one person down that would say, no, I'm going to pass on that. I don't want to invest in the future of our world.
Yeah,
I find, that to me is a really good way to hit the ground running with this work. And I know the other piece I do want to circle back to, you mentioned the research at the beginning of our conversation. And I just want listeners to really understand these systems we are already paying. We speak to the investment. We are already, I'm going to say, wasting money on the way that
I think
we
that's
are.
very fair.
Right? And so you illuminate in this book ways to rethink the money that's already being wasted in really innovative, game-changing ways for our children and for their families. And that's what I appreciate with your perspective. It's not asking for more, it's asking to pause, reflect, and do better with what we know, because there's so much research to support it. um, I want to end with a quote from your book, if it's okay. Um,
Absolutely.
this really struck my heart. And while I'm getting ready to read a little, who is an early childhood teacher that that you could speak to, that maybe from your life, or that is doing this work every day?
Hmm. Gosh, I mean that's sort of like back to that children's book
It
question.
is.
I almost hate to single anyone out because there's so the early childhood workforce in this country is doing absolutely heroic work
Yeah.
every day, right? Working to build the brains of individual kids. It was I mean, to me, Olivia, maybe it's strange to think about like silver linings from COVID, particularly at the height of the pandemic. It was such a hard time for so many people. But one of the beautiful things that happened during the kind of the height of the COVID pandemic is I feel like for the first time, our early childhood teachers got the due that they deserve,
So true.
that they were thought of as being essential workers, and their value was uplifted for other essential workers. And it was so funny, particularly at the height of the pandemic, as a lot of workplaces and schools were closed, that all across social media I was sort of seeing these messages every day about these early childhood teachers ought to be making $1 million a
Yes,
year because I'm realizing how hard this is. And um, so I just,
well said.
I think this book is very much sort of a love letter to the whole field.
It is, and I appreciate that too. And this is where I want to end because I think it helps us be inspired to take action. Um, this idea of tying action to knowledge has always had a special appeal to me, and these are your words. In much of life, we act on the basis of cultural norms and popular wisdom. The associated peer pressure can be powerful, not leading us actively astray as much as creating conditions in which we never even pause to question widely held assumptions until we know better, that is, at which point we are all called to act. It is my sincere hope that having engaged with this book, you now know better when it comes to the value of the early years and the brokenness of our associated systems and policies. What happens next is up to you. And Dan, you have given us the tools to know exactly what we need to do. And I am forever grateful to you for doing this. I carry your book with me all the time in
Thank you.
schools and dinner conversations. So you're a really significant human in this world, an advocate for our children. And I'm so lucky to know you. Thank you, Dan, for this important work.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here, Olivia. I might just punctuate what you just read with one other quote that that I had I run across it at the time I was writing, maybe I would have included. But just to the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said that to know and not to act is not to know.
Yeah.
And so my hope in writing this book is, I think that quote that you read encapsulates it really nicely. My hope in writing this was to change the conversation, to give an opportunity for us to take what is like the water the air we're breathing and the water we're swimming in, um, that sometimes we don't question very much, right? It's just sort of the way things are, and to really think about it critically and differently, um, because the consequences in this case are really huge. So thank you so much for the invitation to be here.
Yeah, it's an honor. Thank you, Dan. Take care. Scholutions Coaching and Teaching Strategies is created, produced, and edited by me, Olivia Wall. Thank you to my older son, Benjamin, who created the music playing in the background. You can follow and listen to Scholutions wherever you get your podcasts, or subscribe to never miss an episode and watch on YouTube. Thank you to my guest, Dr. Dan Worry, for sharing how we can fundamentally reform the early childhood system as we know it. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email at scholutionspodcast@gmail.com. Let me know how you and your community are prioritizing and funding early childhood education. Tune in every Monday for the best research-backed coaching and teaching strategies you can apply right away to better the lives of the children in your care. Stay tuned for my bonus episodes every Friday, where I'll share how I applied what I learned from the guests in schools that week. See you then.